Welcome to the fine print, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Caleb Teskey, and once again today I am joined by Grant Smith-Ellis from Massachusetts. I'm sorry, I misspoke there a little. Grant, welcome back to the show, man. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Wait, Caleb, didn't you know that Boston is Massachusetts as far as
Yes.
most people are concerned?
Okay, fine. He's from Boston, Southie. Uh,
Oh no, but
no,
thank you for having me. It's great to be back. I am a big fan of this show. We just got to see each other about a month ago. Little did we know that as we said our goodbyes and promised to talk again, we would be back with perhaps one of the biggest stories in the past 30 days, which is literally true because in Massachusetts, it seems like there is always something going on.
yeah, and I got to say, as far as return guests go, boy, between the last time we talked and the second time, I feel like this one has escalated the most quickly.
Yes, and for obviously folks who are probably just tuning in and reading the description and the title, this is about the developing situation involving the world and perhaps America, actually America's largest cannabis company, Curaleaf, a multi-state operator with what used to be locations in over 25 states. And after this past week, and we're going to talk about all of this, of course, they now are no longer operating in Colorado, California, and Oregon. But again, this story is not about where they are no longer operating. It's about what's going on with the company. And we'll talk about this, but I'll bring the graphic up, Caleb, if folks want to take a look at it. This graphic is an overview done by Eric Casey
Bang.
from
This is
Story
our this
Magazine.
is our historic first screen share, by the way, Grant. Sorry to interrupt you there, but this is a big moment for the fine print. Thank you.
Oh, I'm honored to take part in the first screen share on the fine print. I actually watch this podcast a lot, and I think it's really cool that this is an opportunity to show folks kind of something that. And again, I want to give credit to the person who put this graphic together, Eric Casey from Worcester Magazine. It's really a good opportunity to show folks a 30,000-foot elevation perspective about what we're talking about, because I entirely understand if people are hearing this story and saying, wait, what? Russian oligarchs, radiation of cannabis, secret human research labs, what is going on here and why? Like, what is this? So I think this does a really good job of giving an overview. It's from Eric Casey, again, at Burn After Reading, which is a great Substack. I encourage folks to take a look at his work. Eric and I have been providing recently coverage of each monthly Cannabis Control Commission hearing. For a little context on myself, my name is Grant Smith-Ellis. I'm a grassroots activist, journalist, and otherwise in the state of Massachusetts. I'm also a law student at New England Law in Boston. For the past 3 years, I've been providing full minute by minute coverage and color commentary on the monthly broadcasts of the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, which is in charge of regulating adult and medical use cannabis in the Commonwealth dating back to 2017. My reporting also appears on a freelance basis in Dig Boston, which is a local independent publication. Eric Casey and I, starting last month and hopefully going forward as well, have now teamed up to do some of these monthly Cannabis Control Commission broadcasts, because 8-hour regulatory hearings absolutely get lonely. And it's a lot more fun when you have someone, Caleb, as I'm sure you know, to talk to about these policy issues.
Oh my God, yeah.
So, with all of that context, Eric Casey put together this amazing graphic as this story was coming out. I've told this before, but this was actually the first story I've ever done where we put an embargo on the material as it was breaking on the day of, which was January 19th, so 10 days ago. So Eric and a few other journalists and I, including folks from Forensic News and whatnot, all had the material. It was embargoed until an agreed upon deadline, which was, of course, the announcing of the Cannabis Control Commission investigation into Curaleaf, and then these graphics and other reporting went out. This graphic, folks are probably saying, okay, so what is it we're talking about? This graphic overviews what the allegations are from both within the company and otherwise related to Curaleaf. The first issue has to do with financing of the company by Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich. Now, folks who have been following this will know this goes back to articles reported in Forensic News 1 month ago or so, December 22nd and December 29th of 2022. And in those articles, Scott Stedman and Matt Bernardi were the co-authors of the December 22nd article. Scott Stedman authored the December 29th article. It came out through an extensive investigation of a Cyprus-based investment firm, two firms actually, that according to the reporting in Forensic News, Curaleaf's initial founding company, which was called Paliatech, which was co-founded by Boris Jordan and a man by the name of Audrey Block, was given hundreds of millions of dollars in loans, not just in 2016 and 2017, but through 2021 and beyond, by a firm owned by Roman Abramovich, a sanctioned Russian oligarch with close ties to Putin, who was basically driven out of the UK because of those ties. So that story in late December is itself a huge deal. Probably one of the stories of the year, without question, although a lot has been going on. So that's a big title. 20 days later, on January 19th, the Cannabis Control Commission gives me a statement on the record confirming that there is an open inquiry into this matter and that they are unable to comment. And by this matter, I mean these three things together. And therefore, there is most certainly an investigation going on into these allegations.
Are those investigations public? Sorry, let me stop you. Is that something like if in Vermont, maybe like if they were investigating someone, can I call and be like, hey, are you investigating these guys?
So that's a good question. The way that this works, and I really appreciate being able to give this context because this is complex stuff. The way that these investigations work is that to get confirmation as a member of the public while they're going on, you have to approach the agency and directly ask. And there are two ways of doing that. One is by being a member of the media and doing a media inquiry, which is how this occurred over a 20-day period, I should say. But the other is to do a Freedom of Information Act or a public records request, which I should note is also underway. In this case, I didn't have to wait for the public records request, which to be denied, which is normally how an investigation is confirmed, because the Cannabis Control Commission gave me this on the record statement. But to answer your question, no, and there's a reason for that.
So they straight up gave you a statement.
Yes, they gave me an on the record statement, but you're getting at something which is really interesting here, which is why are these agencies not more forthcoming about investigations?
Well, I've read the FOIA rules too, and some of the stuff they redact, and it's even the freedom of information. Some of the stuff you have to pay for, which doesn't seem free to me.
But it's for two reasons. One, they don't want the target to know a lot about what they're being investigated about because they can obfuscate their misconduct, and two, at least in my opinion, and two, it compromises the integrity of the investigation because they have to. This body is like an adjudicatory body that has to pass judgment on the findings of this investigation. So that's why they don't talk too much about it, because they are literally the arbiter of whether or not these violations occurred.
Yeah. And so that's why I was kind of impressed that you got a statement out of them.
I don't have any comment on that. The only thing I've said so far is that people can make of what they will, that my reporting, the statement that I got actually came to me before it was given to other reporters, from what I understand, based on their statements. And as a result, those reporters, one of which was with Barron's, a national publication, their reporting came out after mine. So I think we're all doing really good work. Folks were on this story, but folks can make of it what they will, that the statement was given to me on the record.
Will you
first.
Unshare the screen until we get to the unregulated research lab? Beautiful.
Oh, I was so excited about the unregulated research lab. I was having trouble holding it in. I'll admit it. Anyway, please. Sorry.
No, I actually wanted to talk about, you actually went back. You talked about there was a comment you made. I watched the To Be Blunt podcast. Shout out to Perry. What's his name?
Peasy, Lou, and Kristen.
Peasy. Okay, yeah, Peasy. Sorry, I read. Yeah. So I watched that, and you were talking about this oligarch element, and you went back to something I wanted. It was called the glass knot and perestroika or something.
Mhm.
And I would like to hear a little bit about that because I liked your little historical perspective there on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. There's so much going on with this
Yep,
story.
yep.
Sometimes I just want to get it all out.
I like
Um,
that.
so that came up in the context of folks asking, so what is it about the involvement in Russian money, of Russian money in this company that's such a problem? And my opinion on it is twofold. One has to do with the oligarch element, which I'll address first, and then the other element, which is connected to that, has to do with the Ukraine war, which I'll get to second. Folks who don't maybe know, folks who might not know about what Russia looked like after the end of the Soviet Union in the early 90s should understand that at the end of the Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s in the Brezhnev era, there was a reformation initiative that was sort of undertaken that was called Glasnost and Perestroika, as you correctly point out. And although the idea of these programs were to liberalize Russia's communist system and break up kind of centralized state control, what it ended up doing was, and you can read this reporting in a number of international publications, what it ended up doing was creating a centralized class of oligarchs that teamed up with like ex KGB agents like Vladimir Putin to form an authoritarian strongman dictatorship in Russia. This obviously has massive implications in terms of the geopolitical posturing of world affairs. But why we're talking about this is because two of the oligarchs who were intimately involved in the dairy sector and the oil sector during the 1990s and beyond in Russia were Boris Jordan, one of the co-founders of Curaleaf, and Audrey Block, another one of the co-founders of Curaleaf, and also Roman Abramovich, who's now also involved in this story. So that is not Russian money per se. That is centralized oligarch Russian money that played a role in the development of a form of government in Russia that, while masquerading as free market capitalism and democracy, is actually this ruthless form of corporate and sort of authoritarian state control that is enabled because of people like these oligarchs. That's why that's a big issue. So I'll pause there before we go to Ukraine, but that's the first part of it.
Hmm. And what was surprising to me was that everyone, I don't want to say everyone, I don't want to paint this in broad strokes, but people seemed surprised when these stories came out. Oh, it's Russian oligarch. Like I feel like I've known that for a while. I thought that was common knowledge, and now and I know sure some of the details are new, but people really seemed surprised by that, and I was not, because I thought that was just well accepted as the truth.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people thought. They, in terms of they had heard the rumors of the Russian involvement with this company, but they're operating, so they must have been vetted and they must have disclosed it. And just to break that down a little bit, the real initial rumors of Russian involvement, and not just Russian, but kind of Russian oligarch related involvement in this company, dated back to when it was Paliatech. For those who don't know, Curaleaf, before it was Curaleaf, was called Paliatech. It didn't become Curaleaf until the company consolidated control over or consolidated ownership of some companies in the Northeast, Maine Organic Therapies, Massachusetts Organic Therapies, and then the Connecticut version was
Do you
Curaleaf.
do you know when that happened?
It was in 2015, 2017, somewhere in that era.
Thank you.
Um, and so with Paliatech becoming Curaleaf and the consolidation of this control, there was always rumors swirling around about their relationship to Russia. But it wasn't until December of 2022 that the documents came out indicating that there was this financing that involved Abramovich, which was the first time that there were documents indicating that perhaps, and this is the allegation, all of their ties to sectors of the Russian oligarchy or otherwise were not disclosed. Why is that a big deal? And I know you wanted to talk about this.
Yes, I do.
Not every state has rules about this, but some do, Massachusetts being one of them, and it's codified at 935 CMR 500-104. And if you read that section, it's on page, you can go to the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission website, public resources, regulations, click the adult use regulations, the top line, it's the most updated one, and it's page 51 of 152 on that PDF. And if you read that section of the regulations, what you'll see is a very clearly spelled out overview of what obligations companies have when there are indirect or direct ownership or control establishments, or the establishment of ownership or control, or a change related to ownership or control directly or indirectly. That type of regulation has to do with people who get involved with a company fiscally, but don't want to be an owner on paper, but also want to control how the company operates. That is, in my opinion, the basis for why the Cannabis Control Commission on the Russian element of this, the financing, the Abramovich financing element of this, has a basis for looking into whether or not Curaleaf appropriately disclosed the initial loans from Abramovich and then any subsequent loans from that company, and when Abramovich ceased to be involved, if he did cease to be involved with that investment firm, because that's what Curaleaf has said in its press statements, that he eventually ceased being involved. So that's where we are.
And you mentioned a company in Cyprus or something, and I feel like Cyprus is kind of a hub of money laundering.
I don't know enough about
Okay,
the
cool. No,
Cyprus government to comment
that
on
was
that.
that was just a couple of random documentaries that I've watched. But yeah. Okay, we're gonna keep this going. Boy, what do we
Oh,
got?
hold on. So let's get
Yeah.
to I'm sorry, I forgot. Let's just touch on this second part, if you don't mind, about Ukraine.
Oh, there you go.
Um,
Yeah.
so why, Roman, if you were just maybe not disclosing your financing from a Russian oligarch, that's itself a problem for lots of reasons. But when the oligarch is sanctioned in, for example, the EU and elsewhere, because of their ties to Vladimir Putin, who is actively at war with what is in essence a NATO ally, although there's an asterisk on that because the whole issue of whether Ukraine should become a member of NATO, etc.,
Yeah, and
is.
I think there's an asterisk also on war because that might just be a conflict or something, you know.
Yeah, I think you can make that argument, but at a certain point,
I'd call it a
and
war.
yeah, I would call it a war, and we can talk. I mean, we'll just a quick maybe divergence on this for a
Sure, go
second.
for it.
I'm not an expert in that area of the world, the Black Sea and such. But what I will say is that there are clearly geopolitical tensions between Russia and Europe and Ukraine that are related to a few things. One is, so I'm sure you know that Europe, especially Germany and other countries, get a lot of their natural gas from Russia. And for a long time, the way that natural gas got to Europe was through a pipeline that ran through Ukraine. And there was after the fall of, and folks can read about this, I'm not going to go into details. After the fall of communism, there was kind of this tenuously negotiated agreement with like how Russia would pay Ukraine money for using this pipeline to get the gas to Europe, because Russia didn't really have control of the Black Sea back then. And this is another issue we'll talk about. But anyway, that was all well and good when Ukraine was under the control of what was it? Yitvinenko, the strong man who was kind of like the equivalent of the Belarusian leader now, before the Maidan Revolution in 2014 or something. So once the Maidan Revolution happened, the geopolitical posture between Ukraine and Russia completely changed. They went from being like a puppet state of Russia to like moving towards a Western ally. Now, why does this matter? Well, because at the same time, there's this new development of gas extraction technology, and it turns certain parts of Ukraine, one next to, is it Moldova? One on Ukraine's western border, and then one piece of land near the Black Sea. It turns them into really, 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 really rich deposits of oil that couldn't be extracted prior to that point. And so if you look at Russia's tactical invasion of Ukraine from 2014 with the annexation of Crimea
Like
onward,
that.
you'll see that what they're kind of doing is like moving towards where they need to get resources from it. So I do think it is a war. My point is, I do think it is a war. That's why people associated with this government are such a danger, because that is kind of the battle line between the West and Russia. And these people who are associated with Vladimir Putin and the Russian state, if they're funneling money into America and profits out of America, we could be unintentionally funding our own enemy.
And
That's the bottom
you think
line.
it's a war based on a need for or a desire maybe to acquire more resources?
I think it's twofold. I mean, I'm not, again, I'm not an, I'm a, I studied political science,
That's
but I'm
okay.
a,
I like this tangent. I was going to go with it for a second.
that's okay. I'm a political, with the caveat that I'm a political philosopher, not a political scientist. I think it's twofold. One is, right, if Ukraine joins NATO, it brings into play something called Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which says that any attack on a NATO country is an attack on every NATO country.
Mm.
So what I think Russia's doing is doing everything in its power to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. And I think
That
the
I agree with that.
I think that's goal one. And I think goal two is Russia's trying to negotiate a settlement where, at least in my opinion, whereby they're going to take a bunch of this Ukrainian territory because they need access to the Black Sea. They cannot give up Crimea because
Right,
that's how they're getting the gas to Europe if
right,
this
dude.
pipeline thing doesn't work
It's
out.
right.
And
Like that's the access point, and that, when you look at the map, it kind of becomes clear, even on a basic level, like that's the only place. If you control that, you have the only access point for shipments in and out.
yeah, and I think if they can get that other land that I was talking about, I'm going to look this up. Yeah, it is Moldova. So I think if they can get that land near like the Black Sea too, with the oil, the new type of extractable oil, and if they can get the reason why Russia wants the land near Moldova is there's actually a break. Did you know there's a breakaway republic in Moldova as well? And
No.
yes, it's the same thing as kind of Donetsk and whatnot, those like breakaway republics in
Okay.
Ukraine that voted to leave Ukraine and join Russia, even though
Got
it's
you.
probably akin to like when Hitler had Austria do their vote to join the Nazis, which wasn't actually a vote. Uh, it was an annexation.
Yeah, yeah, right.
But there's that exact same thing in Moldova, and I don't think this is a coincidence. It is right on that strip of land of Ukraine's western border, which is within like reaching distance of where these really rich oil deposits are.
Mm.
So I think all of this is connected. I think if Russia gets its way, they get a settlement where they get to keep Crimea. They get some of that land in southern and western Ukraine, and maybe they withdraw. They keep those in breakaway republics, and then they withdraw from the Belarusian border and stuff
Mm.
like that near Kiev. That's how I see it
Oh.
ending.
Mm. I like your theory there, Grant. I think that, yeah, that makes sense. A lot of people seem to think this invasion was for no reason, but like you don't just invade someone for no fucking reason. I don't think there's always a reason, even if they lie about what the reason is or make up a different reason. To mobilize that kind of resources, you got to have a motive, I believe.
Yes, and my apologies to your audience. I drank an entire Donkey's large coffee this morning, which I don't normally do,
Fired
and
up.
that tangent on the geopolitical future of the Balkans was unintended, but thank you for the
No, dude,
indulgence.
I like it. I was curious. It sounded like you maybe like to read about history, so I thought I would ask you about it, and that was great.
Oh, I have a lot of fun. I like to think about the emergence of historical syntheses, which is to say, I like to think about how like dominant and then countervailing um, worldviews emerge on the historical scale to
Mm.
kind of facilitate our sort of understanding of world history and things like that. But anyway, this is a very good example of what I think is kind of the modern meeting point of the two dominant world ideologies, which is like really, really, really corrupt oligarchical capitalism and then slightly less corrupt oligarchical capitalism.
I wonder who's gonna prevail. New money or old money? uh, boy, that's a great.
I'd prefer the Republic prevail, but that's just me.
That was a great quote there, Grant. I wanted to ask you, can we go back to the Curaleaf stuff? That was a wonderful tangent. Um,
Yeah, sure.
I want to ask you this because I listened through the To Be Blunt podcast, and you made another comment that Curaleaf was calling for police task forces to attack the black market and
I
push for
unre
shutting down caregivers in Maine.
Oh yeah, no, you're spot on there. And that ties into the oligarchy thing as well, which is there's a view of government, especially the cannabis sort of license process that says people should get their licenses and then the ladder should get pulled up and then there should be a return to police enforcement targeting the unregulated market in the name of corporate profit, which it should be the duty of the regulatory agency to protect corporate profits by returning us to increased levels of police enforcement. Curaleaf is one of the companies in Massachusetts that was part of a group called the Commonwealth Dispensary Association, who has advocated over 4 years in support of that kind of legislation. There are other companies in New York that were the NYMCIA that was supporting a similar kind of task force. It also leads to things like Curaleaf trying to create policies in Maine that would have shut down 80% of the mom and pop caregivers, which would have been a horrific loss for patients across the state who depend on the fact that there's such a thriving mom and pop caregiver market to get access at a sustainable cost to their medicine. And then so this is, I think, speaks to a broader trend, and of course, opposing home grow as well. This speaks to a broader trend on the mindset of not just Curaleaf, but a number of these corporate operators who think about our lawmaking process and institutions as an opportunity to centralize market control, undermine equitable and fair access to resources, and really wield the tools of the democratic state as sort of a personal plaything in the furtherance of their own profits. It's really scary how it can manifest itself, but it's important to remember that this isn't some new trend in America over the
which
past
was
100.
which was
Yeah,
a note I had here, which is another thing you said was like, this is not new. And you were talking about Russians, but it's not new in general. I think this is just really the first emerging market where we've had the technology to watch it all. We got the internet now, everything's well established. So people are seeing how this sausage is made, as it were. And maybe this is the first good look for some people. And it's not pretty, if you ask me.
that's such a it is a genius level insight, because what you're talking about, and I
Oh, don't
think
blow
you're
up my ego, Grant. You're fine.
no, it's I think you absolutely nail it though, because what you're hinting at and what you're driving at is that in prior eras, let's think back to, I don't
Dude,
know,
even the tech boom, even when the tech boom hit,
sure.
we didn't have the internet was just picking up. So now we have these information. So yeah, go
Sure.
ahead. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
in prior eras, think about the early 1900s, the last time there was really like this big like market consolidation problem with Northern Securities and Standard Oil and sort of that the robber barons of the late 1800s and such. The last time this really happened, and then through the New Deal and whatnot, the way people would get their information was through the the centralized sort of corporate structure that was the very problem in other sectors of industry, right? And this was intentional. It was a byproduct of sort of Edward Bernays and William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. And it was not an accident that our structures of journalism in the era of, or the post robber baron era, became to resemble what the robber barons were doing, because it was the robber barons who took over the press industry. But in any event,
Dude, thanks for mentioning that.
sure. But what you hint at is what is happening by way of the internet, which is nowadays people can amalgamate 10, 20, 30, 40 perspectives on the same situation. And in some cases, they can even get primary source documents and audio and video in real time so that they can interpret the flow of
Right.
information.
Like I would have never met you if it weren't for the internet. Or
Oh,
there's a chance.
sure.
There's a chance. So
You know,
for
and not,
for
not
example.
yeah, and not just that, but by virtue of having the internet, you not only were able to, for example, in the context of this story, take my information, but you were able to go out and, read documents. And another good example of this is I just want to shout out every single person, including you, who is involved in that amazing Twitter thread about the New York
Oh,
dispensary. And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think your viewers should go check it out. If you check out the Fine Prints Twitter feed, you'll see the back and forth. There was a 24 to 36 hour long exchange between Brad Rochino, who's an amazing
Dude, he's
cannabis
great, dude. That guy, I don't know that dude, but fucking hey, man, he's killer.
oh, he's probably the best cannabis journalist in New York. If not, he's probably competing for top cannabis journalist in the United States.
Yeah,
He's just
great,
on
great
another
work, Brad.
level.
If you're listening,
Yes, and there was an exchange between you, him, an amazing dispensary accountability account from Jersey,
yes,
who brought this all to
yes.
light about a license applicant involved in New York, and it was amazing. It was actually a microcosm of the beauty of the internet in the way you're talking about,
I just
because
jumped in randomly. I was like, you know what? I'm
exactly.
curious. I'm gonna go try to find some information that can help this out.
And then 10 people crowdsourced all of these questions, all of these documents. And of course, I want to let you tell folks what you all uncovered. But the point is, the form of what you all were doing was the exact kind of thing that has these giant operators. By the way, Curaleaf shut down, as we mentioned, in 3 states.
I
It has them on tilt because they don't understand why people are engaged in such authentic
are
pursuit of
are
truth.
you a poker player, Grant?
I played Texas Hold'em one time
Yeah.
in London and won 300 pounds and never played again.
Oh, well, tilt. Okay, you said on tilt, and I think that's exactly what's happening. I thought Boris was in panic mode. That's what it felt like to me. The comments that he made in that whatever that podcast was or whatever the other day, it felt like damage control, panic mode.
Yes, but before we get there, I have those comments, by the way, to play. But can we let's go through the maybe you have to make a note, but let's go through the if you don't mind, the what is it, the unlicensed testing lab, and then the radiation machine, and then
Yeah,
I'd like to play his comments,
yeah.
because his comments, of course, come whatever it is, a week, 7 to 8 days late after all of this news comes out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
We'll do whatever you want too. Like I got all afternoon, so
well, I appreciate that. And the unlicensed testing lab, and I've said this before too, the ownership and control implications of this type of financing are extensive. They touch all sorts of areas of our government and our lives and our democracy and our republic. So I don't want to at all say that that is not the most important element of this, because I think it is. But there is another hugely important element that, but for that first element, would be the biggest element of this story, which is, according to my sources within the company, dating back to 2019, Curaleaf has been operating at their Newton facility, at a Newton facility, Newton, Massachusetts facility, an unregulated research lab. Now, that itself would be a big deal, but because that location in November of 2022 got a provisional license, the first of its kind in Massachusetts, to start doing research at that location. Now, involving cannabis. Now, according to my sources within the company dating back to 2019, Curaleaf was taking product from its Webster cultivation facility, Webster, Massachusetts, and bringing it to Newton, diverting it is what it's called, without permission, by courier, and in some cases by use of the mail, to then make into experimental products, which were then tested on employees by way of free samples. The amount of violations, if these allegations are true, and by the way, I've heard about this from multiple people in the company who didn't know each other, are staggering.
I was going to say, what you just listed there was, I mean, through the mail, just the word through the mail, that phrase right there is a federal felony, right?
I federal
If to
felony.
say
I it probably is. I haven't looked at the specific
if you're
federal
sending
law,
weed through
but
the mail, that's yeah. I've had friends that have done federal jail time for that. So We're
And
just
we should be clear, even if it's in the same state, we're not saying they sent it
right,
interstate. It's from Webster to Newton, just any use of the mail at all. And I don't know the
right,
specific federal
right.
code, but it is a violation of law if it's true.
If you're sending drugs through the mail, or I'm sorry, federally scheduled drugs or whatever, that's yeah. Unless you're a pharmacy, I think you need a pharmacy license, and then you could do that.
Well, and even without even going into that, I think what really concerns me about this is there's a reason why we have things called institutional review boards, IRBs. When you are a company or, for example, a university or whatever it may be, doing human research. And the reason for that is there has been a long history in this country and elsewhere of people doing terrible, terrible, terrible things to other human beings in the name of scientific experimentation. So to prevent that,
Yeah,
we
the
create.
Tuskegee. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Right.
sure.
The
I think.
Nazis. Yeah, there was all kinds of yeah.
Oh, sure. The During the invasion of China by the Japanese in World War II, there's allegations of medical experimentation.
Even in
there.
Vermont, they were doing MK Ultra. There was a fucking hospital here in Vermont where they were doing some sketchy experiments. So
Yes, I'm very close to Harvard University, so that program is not unknown to people around these parts.
word up.
Um, but I will say that the insight here, I think, is that it is not a small thing to just say, well, we're going to give a free sample to someone of a newly developed product and have it tested. It sounds innocuous. It really does. But in an institutional setting, it is a serious violation, if true, a serious, serious violation of ethics, a serious, serious violation of the way regulatory compliance is set up for this kind of experimentation. And I think what's important as well to remember about this is there's another element to this, which is there are quality control samples in Massachusetts where every employee of a regulated cannabis establishment that's a cultivator or whatnot can maybe one other type of license can get up to 28 grams of flower for free per month from their employer, 7 different strains, 4 grams of each of those strains. That's one thing. When you're doing the testing, when you're doing the quality control sample, when you're giving it out like you're supposed to. I have nothing against people giving out free product to their employees. In fact,
Me either.
I probably wouldn't be yelling from the rooftops if you were giving more free product than you were supposed to your
I
employees.
like that you could. I wish you could
Right,
give
but
out more samples. Yeah.
where my issue comes in is when you're taking the product, developing it into untested experimental products, and then under the auspices of free samples, testing it on your employees. That, in
Oh,
my opinion, if true, is really wrong.
that's actually. I would say that's fucked. That would be the word that I would pick for it, if in fact it were true. Yep. That
Uh,
is that is weird, especially if you're working with any kind of them weird synthetics or any of that funky shit. Um, hmm.
so my sources from within the company tell me that the types of product developed at this Newton lab ranged from an experimental inhaler, a beverage infuser that would actually go to market, and then a Delta 8 shatter, a Delta 9 shatter, and then other products.
Testing out their
Um,
Delta 8 on the employees, huh? Yeah.
well, and again, this is what was reported to me from not only employees who visited the location, but an employee who got a product from the location before. Now, this Newton location, as of November 2022, has a provisional license. So even if we were in you can't even produce these kind of products on a provisional license on an experimental basis at your
Oh,
research lab. Well, yeah, it needs to be operational, but these products that I was seeing were from far before November 22. So, but even if it were after that, I think that wouldn't even sort of matter here. But the point is, what's at issue here is whether or not the CCC is looking into this. And I think, and there's one more element of this, of course, which is that the radiation machine. So let's touch this as well. But I think that on the first issue,
pull the screenshot back up when you do that.
oh, sure. I think on the first issue, the ownership and control violations, you have international potential international ramifications. It's that is intense. On the
For sure. This would be basically international money laundering on a massive scale in Canada as well, in
I
America. Like if
it,
assuming
it
this
may
adds up, yeah.
it may well be. I don't know enough about investment control rules. There are things called, like, I'm sure you know, like the OFAC list, the Office of Foreign Asset Controls.
I don't know about that. Nope.
Oh, okay, so there
I
are
suck at money, Grant, because I've never had any of it.
well, there are ways that, and I only know of this tangentially because one time I listened to this really interesting case where this guy pretended to be a gold importer and took advantage of this very wealthy person from Tennessee. And as a byproduct of listening to 6.5 hours of depositions about this random case, I happened to learn about the fact that the Treasury Department maintains an OFAC list, but that's neither
Cool.
here nor there when it comes to this story, which is me just telling you in general, there are, in general, like I said, government bodies that deal with the way that money moves around on the international level. And my
Sure.
point is they exist for good reason. If that's involved here, I don't know. Could it be?
Yeah.
I
But I wasn't trying to make an allegation either. I just said, like, if that is going on, like, that would for sure seem to be a big pro. Like, you can't even move money across state lines. If you're moving across international lines, it gets worse, I think.
Well, and I won't go too deep into this either, but this touches on something else you've maybe seen me tweet about, which and talk about, which is why our companies, especially large companies, treated with ostensibly kid gloves, well, you and I or any other citizen would be, you know, made an example of for 1/10 of some of these allegations.
I
And the
agree with
reason,
that too. I feel you on that point. Yep.
and the reason, and again, this all really ties in because it has to do with kind of like what happens when you have a government that functions not for its citizens but for, corporate entities that get the label of person. And if you I'm not going
Thank
to
you,
do the deep.
Citizens United. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, it goes even deeper than that, but
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It was
I'm not
before that.
I'm not going to do the deep dive on it.
No,
If you
that
want
just
to,
codified it. Yeah. It was like
well, you're exactly right about that. But if you want to read the history of it, you can take a look at Citizens United v. FEC from 2010. Great case to read. If you want to learn more about it, Connecticut General Life Insurance v. Johnson from 1939, the dissent by Justice Hugo Black, setting aside the fact that Mr. Hugo Black is infamous for other things. He was a renowned constitutional scholar who points to a case from 1886 called Santa Clara County versus Southern Union Pacific. And you can see, if you read this case, about how the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which was supposed to prevent Southern states after the Civil War in the Reconstruction era and beyond from denying human rights, basically, to formerly incarcerated Black Americans. You can see how that amendment was thrown completely out in the context of Southern states doing that, which is why we got Jim Crow, and instead appropriated by corporations to absolve them from regulatory oversight by giant corporations, which is why for many years there were no minimum wage laws, why there's no collective bargaining, why children could work in factories, all because the 14th Amendment was appropriated, stolen from the Black race after it was liberated. The Black race was liberated from slavery and then given over to corporations by a reactionary, very pro-corporate legislature and Supreme Court and executive, until basically, ironically, the rise of grassroots investigative journalism in the early 1900s. Ida Tarbell, Henry Demiris Lloyd, Lincoln Steffens, S.S. McClure, Upton Sinclair, which then caused Teddy Roosevelt, who was never supposed to be president, to start breaking these companies up. So unless there is a demand from
and
the
that's how we got the
citizen,
food safety laws too.
exactly, unless there is a demand from the citizens, nothing ever gets done. And what I think's great about this situation is there is a demand. There is a clarion call coming from all sectors of the United States in some regard, saying this is not okay. Do something about it, and their connections be damned. Stand up, protect all of us, and make a move. And I think they're saying that to every regulatory agency in the country, which they should be doing.
Mm, mm. I agree. I want to keep going because I still got, boy, I got a bunch here. This might be. Do you have another hour? Because this might be a 2 hour jam here.
Oh, we can talk for as long as you want. Do we
Okay,
want to?
cool.
You ask the questions. Just don't
Cool.
forget about the radiation machine.
Yo, and I want to talk. I want to go back to the Curaleaf stuff because one thing I was curious about was all these lawsuits that they've faced, um, mislabeling products, stealing tips from employees, unapproved additives in vape cartridges. Big recalls, massive fucking layoffs, um, and you know, is there anything that these guys do well?
Um, I I don't know if I would frame it like that. I think what I would ask is why do we see this series of not just lawsuits but regulatory fines? I mean, they were fined $250,000 by the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission in
For what?
2019 for ownership and control violations. They did a merger
Really?
and did now the quotes at the time were they didn't fill out a form, but the reality is they didn't notify the commission of a merger, and they settled and admitted to what they needed to
And
and
then,
got it to
wow. Okay,
they
cool.
got a $250,000 fine. And then you're talking about some other things in other states. I think folks should look those up as well. Ongoing lawsuits and other violations that the company is alleged to have committed. I'm not going to comment on any specific, especially open lawsuit. It's really not appropriate.
Yeah, that's
But
cool. But
what
like
I
a two
will,
hundred and fifty thousand dollar fine, they could probably sell $250,000 worth of weed in a day, and
yeah,
then
but the point isn't
pay
the
off the
fine.
merger. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, yeah, yeah.
the point isn't the fine because that's governed by something called like regulatory taking, where like the when the government takes property, whether of a corporation or otherwise, there's very like strict rules, especially in like a civil fine context. But the point is not to fine them. The point is to say, you did this, we caught you. If you want to not have this really be escalated to a formal resolution, you settle, you admit to what we require, and we're going to publicly put this out there. That's what, and if you know, so that's really what I want to talk about, which you rightly point out is the trend. It's the trend of being sued, the trend of regulatory violations, the trend
Right,
of allegations.
right. Even if you didn't do anything illegal, it's a a demonstrated history of sort of malpractice, if you will.
I'd call it closer to malfeasance because these are really a cannabis license, and there's a good debate to be had about whether it's an exclusive state contract, but it's an exercise in public trust. And people are, say to me, Grant, why do you get so in arms about this? And it's because this is a microcosm of the integrity of our lawmaking process. When you're issued a license, it's
That's
the
what I was saying
result.
earlier about
It,
seeing how the sausage is made.
exactly. It is the result of a very finely tuned, in theory, and implemented process that has checks and balances and independent appointments. And the baseline check and balance, though, is the public discourse surrounding these issues. And so if you're saying to me, how do they keep getting away with this? The answer is because we have yet to get to a point where the public discourse has demanded that they not be allowed to do so. However, I think to take the words of Mr. Jordan and use them how they should be used, the pendulum is swinging, and we are about to see that kind of enforcement, in my opinion.
Do you want to talk about the comments that he made on that podcast or whatever it was? There.
Yeah, we can play it now.
Oh
So
yeah, you got
these
the
just
audio. That's right. We're gonna do audio for the first time. Thank you, Grant. By the way, this is the first screen share, first audio. Hell yeah.
This is a tweet. This is a tweet that I put out. Let me give some context here. So on what was it, January 26th, so 3 days ago. I want to give credit to Lester Black, who is the contributing cannabis editor for San Francisco Gate, which is a news, culture, sport, opinion journalist publication from the San Francisco and Bay Area. You can find more from them at SF Gate, and you can find more from Lester Black at LEDDDER. So I'm going to bring up a video here where Lester says, LOL, this is a tweet Lester put out. Just heard Curaleaf CEO and billionaire Boris Jordan say on Twitter Spaces that criticism of his pod company borders on racism. And Mr. Jordan did a lot more than that. If you take a look at this video here, actually, I may not have shared audio, so I'm going to go back here.
That's right. We're gonna get it.
No, I did actually. So this is
There we go.
this is the same exact screen. What you're seeing here is you see Lester's tweet January 26th. This is a Twitter space that the Curaleaf executive chairman Boris Jordan did a few. I think it was 6 days after the initial reporting, 2 days after the Barron's news came out, and on the same day that news came out that Curaleaf engaged in another round of layoffs. This was Friday morning.
Yeah, they did.
They let staff know by press release, despite the fact that I had tweeted about the layoffs on Tuesday night. Furthermore, they also announced that, as I mentioned, they're closing all their stores in Colorado, California, and Oregon, and they're shutting down their Amesbury, Massachusetts location, which is 33% of their cultivation.
I just saw that's the 33% of the state's entire cultivation space, isn't it?
I think it might have been 33% of Curaleaf's.
Oh, I thought they said that was the entire state. Okay, cool.
No, that would be a lot. But
yeah, I was just gonna say, dude, like, geez. Okay.
So, but what we're going to listen to now is remarks that Jordan made on a Twitter space Friday night after all of this news had been coming out all week, after the news articles had come out. And you'll hear Jordan do three things. One, he outright says that criticism of Curaleaf borders on racism. Then he goes on to say that the New York equity rollout is violating its own laws and should be sued, and people who would sue would win. And then he says, which I think is the most grotesque part, that because states like New York got bailed out from tax issues, they decided to focus on giving assets, he said, but really it was equity status to people who are, quote, felons and, quote, people who have two heads. So we'll talk about it after we listen, but that's the gist of what this clip's going to be. So let's take a listen.
For everyone on the call, can you just give us your confidence in that? And then several questions around that. People are wondering, is it IFRS or is it GAAP? They want to know if taxes, are you going to be paying taxes to get to that 125?
So let me first of all dispel any. I know there's a lot of people that like to misrepresent about Curaleaf. There's a lot of hate out there for some reason for our company, bordering on frankly racism. But
occasionally, but are any progress or any line of sight to some of these states loosening license caps or anything? Because that's obviously a massive challenge for some of these states. Is just they limit the scale. No one can make money. Just any.
Listen, I think there's two things. The first thing is I think the pendulum is about to swing a little bit against some of the more radical social justice warriors, because Florida and Texas always managed their balance sheet frugally. These states spent like drunken sailors and didn't. Anyway, they got bailed out, so they didn't need the tax revenue. And this whole industry was built on the back of needing tax revenues originally, and so they didn't need the tax revenue. So they went off on these programs. We're going to give these assets to felons and people that have two heads and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was hilarious. Some of these things that are being done are absolutely cool. I mean, New York has, at my last count, violated 8 to 10 of their own laws with the launch of this program. So if people take them to court, they're going to lose. They're just going to lose.
Well, there you go. From
like what he wants other people to do lawsuits for him because he doesn't have the money.
Well, no, but I don't think
Boy, that was a lot to unpack there, man.
Right. And my question is, Boris, what do you mean that they're giving assets to felons and people with two heads? This industry was not built on the back of tax revenue. It was built on the back of decades of racially targeted incarceration that you now want to perpetuate, apparently, so that you can make money. What do you mean it was built on the back of tax revenue? And what do you mean they're giving it to felons?
If you go back, you'll see a stupid face I made when he said this industry was built on the backs of, I was waiting for him to say, growers and black market dealers and medical patients and people who took the risk. And he was like, no, man.
Well, no, and beyond
people that
just
need tax revenue, like, no, that's not how we built this.
Beyond just the targeting the unregulated market and how that was really the core of legalization, tell me, Boris, what do you mean by giving assets to people who have two heads? What were you trying to say there? That doesn't, the only way that makes sense, and I'm interpreting, this is my opinion, the only way that makes sense is if you're saying they gave it to them based on characteristics. Is that what you were saying, Boris? You have a problem with that? You have a problem with giving it to people because their communities were targeted by the drug war? And you're telling me that you want a diversity, equity, and inclusion award in 2019, and your
But
company.
also like talking about telling people to sue the state. It's like, yo, how many fucking times has Curaleaf been sued, dude? So many fucking times. Like, and as a guy who's lost so many lawsuits, he would know when you could sue someone and beat them, you know?
Well, and no, and if you remember when the Commonwealth Dispensary Association, so in Massachusetts, we being this grassroots group called the Massachusetts Cannabis Association for Delivery and a bunch of other grassroots advocates, worked to create a format for adult use delivery that included this model that would allow folks to have a vault, like an independent standalone vault, take online orders and deliver to consumers directly after buying it wholesale from cultivators and manufacturers. The brick and mortar retailers hated it. And the brick and mortar retailers hated the fact that the Cannabis Control Commission in the summer of 2021 in Massachusetts created an at minimum 3-year period during which those delivery licenses would only go to social equity and economic empowerment companies.
And they try to sue the state for that, right?
They did. And in that lawsuit, 7 days after that lawsuit was filed in January of 2021, I think it was. So it was actually the summer of 2020 that maybe these regs were passed. But in January, when that lawsuit is filed, within 7 days, 14 members of the Commonwealth Dispensary Association have resigned from the group, and the lawsuit gets withdrawn. But who stays in the group? Curaleaf. So when you think about what these companies are trying to do, when you look at their tactical posturing across the United States, they think exactly as Mr. Jordan just said on that recording. You only get legalization because we pay taxes to you. So if you do anything that threatens our profits and therefore our ability to pay you taxes, you've undermined the point of legalization. No, Mr. Jordan, your centralization of the market, in my opinion, has undermined the point of legalization. Thank you.
And it seems like maybe you want to talk about like the limited licensing states, because it sounds like maybe that's a factor here in the way they've attempted to operate.
Oh, are you? Oh, yeah. So I think there's no, it's not a coincidence that Curaleaf shut down in Colorado, Oregon, and California, which are 3 states that do not have a license cap. And what I mean by that is some states rightfully have a per entity license cap. So you can only own or control a certain number of licenses per entity. But if your other states cap the number of licenses in total that they give out, either by license type or just in total, those markets obviously favor centralized producers, but unlimited markets favor smaller producers. So it was very interesting that Curaleaf pulled out of Colorado, Oregon, and California, because again, those markets don't have overall license caps of any kind. So is that a harbinger of things to come? Curaleaf's a big player in Maine. There was a great Twitter account that pointed out, can Curaleaf really continue to compete in an unlimited license state like Maine when they have to sell ounces for $70?
I just saw that. Yeah, I was just following that this morning.
Right, so can they really compete against some of the best home growers in the United States?
Yo, Maine is really
ounces?
killing it, dude. Maine has some fucking killer product coming now.
Oh, I would say that the patients who live in Maine, and they do have out of state, by the way. If you're going up to visit Maine for a few days, you're going to visit some family, you're going to do a nice vacation up there, whatnot. It's a beautiful place to go visit any time of year. You go stay for a few days, you bring your out of state medical card, you go to a caregiver, you can get some cannabis, you can sit on the porch of your Airbnb or whatever you rent, and you can enjoy some of the best quality flower extracts, edibles in the entire United States. And I'm not talking about from just like one dispensary or something. Almost every mom and pop caregiver shop is perhaps the greatest source of cannabis medicine that you can get in the United States. And it is a haven for people who have been exposed to these captured markets, because they can then see what will happen if we stop, in my opinion, as a grassroots community, these giant MSOs from centralizing control. We can pay a reasonable price to people from our communities for good quality medicine without feeling like we're being exploited. There is a future here, and I can see it coming to fruition in real time.
Yeah, Maine's killing it. Mm-hmm. Where was I at? I lost my place for a second.
Oh, I dropped my lighter, but you can see my
Uh,
nice paint. Do you see what my painting is in the background there?
oh, oh yeah, yeah. What's up? Did you do that?
No, I got
Are
it
you at
from my
Bob Ross?
friend.
Yeah.
No, it's a you might not be able to see it, but it's actually a 40 pouring into a stream in the woods.
Oh, is that an Old English?
Yeah. Now I quit drinking many over a decade ago actually, but
Yeah, good for
my
you.
friend made that painting and I just thought it was so serene. And anyway, I wanted to point it out to
Mm.
you as I take a break to hit this bowl. So thank you.
Yeah, hell yeah. I want to talk about secret radiation machine. Pull that back up if you wouldn't mind.
Oh yeah, let me get the graphic back up for
Hell
you.
yeah.
So this is again the graphic from Eric Casey with Burn After Reading. You can see here at the bottom
Dang.
another element of my reporting is that according to sources within the company, Curaleaf was using a rad source gamma radiation machine to irradiate its cannabis flower. And they, again, according to employee allegations, the company did not report use of this radiation machine. And when CCC inspectors would come to the Webster facility where it was in use, they would the company allegedly would put an out of order maintenance sign on the door to hide its existence. Now you might be asking yourself, well, do they need permission to use a radiation machine? No, they don't.
Why don't you
Um,
could you just maybe give the 30,000 foot view on remediation real quick and how what they're doing with those machines?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So in the now remediation of cannabis in the United States and Canada and whatnot is common. And in fact, remediation by way of radiation, gamma radiation, is common too. And what the point of this is that companies can have product that will fail testing standards for things like mold or bud rot or powdery mildew, but they get a chance to remediate the product, which can be done, and then get it onto shelves. Now, in industrial agricultural context, this is a practice technique. I want to be clear. We are not saying, and I hope no one takes away from this, that we are saying you're going to turn into the Hulk because you consume irradiated
No, don't they
cannabis or
do this
food.
with like spices, dried spices and shit?
Oh, a lot of foods. If you and now some countries have more strict disclosure requirements than others, but it is not uncommon. Here's the issue, though. One, what we just talked about, remediation of contaminated product, that's itself an issue, right? Because it's an indication that the product being grown by the company isn't up to standard, even if they can legitimately get it onto market.
Sure.
But the other issue is what it does to the actual chemical composition of the flower. Radiation involves heat. So if you irradiate cannabis flower, you're gonna, no matter what, convert some THCA to delta 9, which is basically what happens when you decarboxylate cannabis flower in preparation to make it into edibles. So there's no way to avoid that, according to knowledgeable sources I've spoken to about the procedure, which is itself a problem. But also, beyond being a problem, it's actually interesting if you're an end consumer and you want to find out and you don't have access to the certificate of analysis from the lab for the strain you're getting from a regulated dispensary. Look at your container. There's by law, there's going to be testing results on it. If you see delta 9 THC on the flower test result, that is an indication, according to my sources, that the flower's been irradiated.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah, yeah.
the second component is irradiation degrades the terpene profile of cannabis flower.
That seems to be the biggest objection that I've heard.
Yeah, and this is a problem. A lot of people think, oh, terpene profile, so your weed's not going to taste as good. Like, why are you complaining? No, terpenes are as integral, if not more integral, to the holistic or overall impact of the cannabis flower as a medication or a substance than the different types of THC or CBD or whatnot in the flower. And throwing off that balance by degrading the terpenes through radiation does not have a negligible effect. It
I know,
has,
especially like when it's already like, boy, if you need that, it's probably already not good to begin with. Now you're gonna blast it, and now it's gonna be even less
right, and
good.
it will go down the line once these components of the plant are shifted, that's going to, if you said blast, so that's where my mind went.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't the scientific term,
no,
but
no, but if you run this stuff into to extract or whatever, like you've compromised the composite. Now, fine, if you are just extracting the THCA or something, okay, fine. But if you're doing a full plant extract from a plant that has degraded terpene profiles and converted some of its THCA to delta 9 or whatnot, that changes every part of that manufacturing process. And the impact, even though you can sell it and make money, the impact is on the end consumer and the end patient. And that's one big issue I see with it.
That's the biggest issue. The whole thing, the whole point of this legal regulated market was so we could get a safe and tested product, not like a a remediated, like, whatever it's like you've taken the whole, I don't know, it seems like they've undermined the whole sales pitch for this thing by doing stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a strong point, but I think people should understand, and I'm sure you know this, the way cannabis is tested is batch testing, right? So remember earlier we were talking about how having a cannabis license involves an element of trust, fundamentally. And one reason for that, among many, is that you get to select your own sample in some states to send for testing. And that sample is like reflective of an entire batch. So if you do things like dry out your sample or coat it with keef or manipulate it so that it can pass testing despite being contaminated, that's a real problem. Now, what's another problem? Well, if there's competition among testing labs, some labs, and there's a really informed medical patient named Lorna McCafferty. I work with her. She's very informed about the industry. She's quoted in my initial January 19th story that broke the news about these three different topics. But she's quoted especially about this contaminated product issue as talking about how, and I can confirm this because I've seen these test results firsthand. I've shared screenshots of them on social media. She commented about how there's a very strange trend in Massachusetts where we've seen some testing labs put out flower with 44% THC as a result.
I've seen it.
Now,
I've seen it.
That is unheard of. That is unheard of.
Doesn't exist.
That, at least as far as I know, that does not exist. And then on top of that, and Lorna goes on to say this, and I think a number of other patients have said it as well, and it is 100%, in my opinion, and commissioners have raised similar concerns, a serious issue.
Was that a Curaleaf place?
No.
Okay.
It was not. But one of the, and again, to be clear, retailers are one thing, independent testing labs, as their name implies, are different. They're not, you can't, in fact, you cannot have any involvement in an independent testing lab and also have an ownership stake in a retailer. That is like one of the most firm prohibitions the CCC has. It's some of the strictest sections of the CCC's regulations have to do with the relationship between testing labs and marijuana establishments. Now, the reason for that, I think, is very good, because what allegedly is happening now is some testing labs, because of this perverse incentive to attract clients, are putting out artificial THC results, which is a problem because it's manipulative, obviously, but also passing product that would otherwise fail. So for set aside remediation, forget about legitimately getting contaminated product on the market, quote unquote. What Lorna reported, Ms. McCafferty reported, and what I think might be happening as well, is that there might be labs out there who are allowing product without even going through remediation that is contaminated to pass, which means that whole batch passes and gets onto the market. Now, Commissioner Kimberly Roy, back in August of 2022, actually put out some remarks about this at a press conference, and she said, this is this is a consumer protection issue because of the health and safety issues involved for patients and consumers of the contaminated product, but it's also an anti-competitive issue, because how can a lab who's playing by the rules compete when other labs are cheating to attract customers? So that's the bigger picture here, in my opinion, with this contaminated product discussion. I think it's very important.
Yeah, and when you combine that with the sort of the lab shopping issue, that's a whole other, boy, that's a weird one.
Yo, you should talk about lab shopping while I get my voice back while I drink
I
water.
gotta pee, dude. Can we pause for a second?
Just leave the recording running so nothing goes wrong.
I'll be right back. Fantastic. Lab shopping.
Welcome back.
Thank you for waiting. Yeah. Do you want to talk about lab shopping?
No, I wanted to hear your perspective on it because yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic that goes way beyond Massachusetts. So yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
well, I've just interviewed a couple of people that that I talked about. My guy Scott Waring. He's a PhD lab. Like he built some labs out in New Mexico. He's a great guy. And one of the questions I asked him was, if you wanted to cheat one of these tests, how would you do it? Because and I know there's ways to do it. I've been in and around enough labs to know. And even if you're not cheating, there are ways to maybe your machines aren't calibrated properly. There are, which is another thing that you have to, so you really need good people in these labs, trustworthy people that know their shit. And, it reminded me of back in the day when the first thing I thought of, like, well, how would you cheat a test? Like, well, like remember when your buddy would sell you an eighth, he'd put his finger on the scale a little bit, and then you don't get a half a gram, and it's like when you weren't looking, he just pushed it a little tiny bit, and or something like that. That was the first example I thought of. But the sample selection certainly seems to be the easiest, most convenient way where you could get around that. You give them your best nugget, and then you make pre rolls with your shake or your fucking trim.
Oh yeah, no, you're spot on. We as a community, country, etc., need to think about how are these samples being collected. Why companies should not just be choosing them, and testing labs can't be choosing them because that creates the same conflict of interest. How are we going to set up sample collection? And the other thing is, one thing and some commissioners have talked about this, as I mentioned, Commissioner Kimberly Roy in Massachusetts in particular, a statewide standards lab. So a government regulatory body run lab, not to test the product in the state, because goodness knows that would take 4 years for a sample of flour to get done. And I'm not saying it just because there would only be one and there would just be no way to do it efficiently. But what those labs could do, that statewide standards lab, is it could set, much like ISO accreditation for laboratories on the international level, it could set standards for these labs and then do compliance checks in a way that perhaps the CCC can't do, because it's kind of like the age-old paradox of, well, if you only pay $180,000 to people to work at the SEC, why wouldn't they just go make millions of dollars to be evil on Wall Street? If you have to create conditions whereby people working in these testing laboratories aren't doing it to help the commercial market make money, but instead operating in the realm of where can we catch bad actors, right? So they would, in essence, be setting up standards for, and that's why it has to be an independent government run thing. They'd be setting up standards that, that's where I was going. They'd be setting up standards so that the CCC, who maybe doesn't have the ability internally to attract the kind of talent that could understand the way labs manipulate their process to then set up an institution that could then have its own, sort of what's the word, gravitas attached to it, so that scientific minds who are interested in helping the public can go there, provide the CCC with the information they need to hold these labs accountable so they don't manipulate test results and pass contaminated product.
Yeah, and it was funny because I got a couple of funny looks when I first started asking about these questions, and it's like I didn't think it was a ridiculous question. Like you could cheat anything, but I was like, people, why would a lab do that? They risk their entire credibility. It's like for money. I assume for money. Like,
well, this America.
Why does anyone cheat at anything? They want to make more money. Like I assume.
Well, and they wouldn't call it cheating. I don't think. I think what they'd say is it's the same thing as Trump used to say about his taxes. You wrote the rules. I paid people money to exploit them. Okay. Like if you want to hold me accountable, write better rules. I don't think any of these testing labs would be that brazen, but that's, I think, fundamentally what's going on here.
Here's another. Sorry to cut you off. Another great point you made was about keeping the shit consistent across the entire industry, which I thought was fascinating because I talked to one lab that told me that their standard operating procedures are covered by trade secret laws. So that brought it. Yeah, right.
Well, and I'm not saying that's like not possible, but I think on a wider lens, right? So you have ISO accreditation, right? So that's the bare minimum in a lot of states. ISO accreditation, that's the bare minimum in a lot of states for being a lab. You need to at least be ISO accredited. So there are some standards, but if you look at like ISO standards, it's not like they were thinking about cannabis labs. They were thinking about all sorts of labs, and cannabis labs only just started to exist. Now, ISO is, if you know anything about like the federal rules of civil procedure or any of like these like standard committees, it's always evolving. So yes, ISO will probably get to a point eventually where this stuff is dealt with, but in the short term, and because we need immediate intervention, a state-run standards lab would be able to create those kind of informed standards that, right? Because right now, let's be realistic. We could go around to all of these labs and say, what's the best way to prevent you from cheating the rules as they exist now? But not only are they not compelled to answer that question, it is not in their best interest.
Yeah, you're probably just giving them free information, right?
Well, no, you're right. Exactly. It is not how America works. If we want this kind of stuff done, we have to regulate them, and we have to do it in a way that's kind of like a cat and mouse game and this is where I was going. This is the story of every industry in the United States, whether it's markets or otherwise. You have regulators and you have companies, and there's a gray area that exists between what the regulators want to do and what's codified in the rules they're allowed to use to enforce the standards related to the industry. And what companies are always doing is trying to operate in a way that is, well, technically legal, problematic. And the job of regulators and, inform members of the public who do things like listen to this wonderful show to make sure they're abreast of developments related to the public policy arena. What our job is, journalists as well, is to make sure that the balance in that process is not tilted in favor of these corporate interests, that they get a voice just like everyone else, but that they're not defining the rules in ways which are harmful to everybody else. And I think this situation that we're talking about right now, and the way testing labs are regulated and all of that, is a key microcosm of this, because clearly these industry folks wrote these rules. Otherwise, why would they be selecting their own samples? Now, I'm not saying they wrote every rule, right? But it is just a natural byproduct of the fact that complex lab testing is something that not a lot of people understand. So when you get a bunch of experts telling you this is the best way to do it, this is the best way to do it, it's easy to manipulate the government. And then we as conscious consumers come in and say, government, hey, it's good that you tried. You need to adjust. Here's how to do it. We support you. Forget what these big companies are doing. Forget their ability to influence political donations or otherwise. Do the right thing. And here's how to do it.
Yeah. And even like, if you wanted to know how to cheat one of those tests, it would require the same skill set it took to perform the test. And, so like, I don't think there's a ton of people in the Vermont government that know how to do like analytical, like chemistry. And, there's just not a lot of those people out there. It's very specialized kind of kind of thing. And boy, yeah. So who's gonna do the oversight? Really, you need some good nerds up there.
That's one way to put it. I think the other way to put it is the only way we have a fighting chance as a grassroots community is if government is acting in the interests of the public at large
So
rather
we're
than
fucked.
well, no, but here's the thing. There's a great book. It's actually a series of 3 volumes that I really like by an academic named Bruce Ackerman, and it's called We the People, Volume 1, 2, and 3. And I won't bore you with a synopsis of all 3 volumes, although I would love to do so. But the central thesis of the book is called constitutional dualism. And the theory that Ackerman proposes, and we haven't even learned this in my law school classes yet. I just really like this book. But the theory that Ackerman proposes is that throughout the history of the United States, there's kind of been an oscillation between 2 eras. On a very grand scale. One of those types of eras is called what he calls traditional lawmaking or something like that, where it's just kind of our regular processes of lawmaking, what you and I would think of as, just the, corrupt American way where, business as usual, usual suspects paying the usual suspects to engage in regulatory capture, et cetera, et cetera. But then there are moments, brief, shining, fleeting though they may be, of constitutional lawmaking. And Ackerman points to the founding, Reconstruction, usurped though that may have been by Santa Clara County v. Southern Union Pacific in 1886, and the New Deal, where there are fundamental sort of uprisings in the public consciousness that reaffirm our shared commitment as a society to core constitutional principles of representative democracy. And in those moments, we come to shape and define the history of the United States. And when it comes to the way large corporate forces, whether it be in the cannabis industry or otherwise, are coming to impact all aspects of our government on the local, state, federal, regulatory level or otherwise, when it comes to the way that is sort of mashing up with the hyper-centralization of wealth, we are on a very, very dangerous path, and only that kind of constitutional sort of moment is going to save this republic. And I hope people realize that it's not going to be someone else. It's going to be your involvement, and then the butterfly effect of the 6 people getting involved because, this person who doesn't really, ever get politically engaged is now trying to protect the republic from a very serious threat. That's the kind of thing that changes history, and that's the kind of moment I think we're in right now.
And that's a great point. And to tie that back in with your earlier point about like the money law or whatever, the sketchy stuff, like this is not unique here to this industry. Like, and if you don't step in, like you've got to assume that a lot of this is just going on across every industry, and it's got to, the corporatization sort of the entire American, job market. It seems wild, man. And it's, the weed industry isn't even the biggest industry in this country, so you got to assume like in other industries, boy.
The question, did you see that FBI agent who got arrested a few days ago?
No.
Oh, you should look that up. It's really interesting. This former FBI agent got arrested for taking an alleged bribe from another sanctioned Russian oligarch by the name of Oleg Deripaska. But what's really fascinating about this, and this is just
Charles McGonigal.
That I think was the agent's name.
54. Arrested on charges relating to the receipt of $225,000 in cash from an individual who had business interests in Europe and who had been an employee of a foreign intelligence service.
Yeah, that would be the gentleman, and it was just recently, right? What day was the article?
That was 6 days ago.
Right.
I don't have a Jamie like Joe Rogan, so I have to pull shit up myself.
But you want to know what just, apropos of nothing, you want to know what's really interesting about that company that was involved with bribing that FBI agent?
Yes.
Boris Jordan's brother is on the board of that company.
What's his name?
Oh, it's in the article somewhere. But and I don't want to dive too much into this because again, this is apropos.
Don't worry about it.
this is apropos of nothing, right? Like I'm not at all thinking about the larger implications of the interplay between this amount of money and our democratic process and the way elections work and all of that. But if I were thinking about that kind of thing, one could get the impression that do not just, and I don't want folks to think that like this is the way that this is all happening. No, this is one small microcosm of the way this kind of, usurpation or takeover happens.
And
But one,
it's a great chance to see it in action.
right, one could get the impression that we are on the verge of losing, and perhaps we already have lost in many ways, control of this government in this country, and that the democratic process is becoming a facade to enable the interests of a very small and powerful group of moneyed interests. And this is not an exercise in theory. Folks should be aware that when this country was founded, beyond the battles over slavery, which were their own very serious problem, but this country was founded over a debate between creditors and debtors. And the very early debates in this country, Federalist 10, if folks want to look it up, by James Madison, the very earliest debates in this country were about how do we design a form of government on the state and federal level that will protect us from the interests of moneyed groups. And if you
like
think
the government,
well, no, but he goes on a more fundamental level and says, if you think about it, right, the human propensity or like natural human inclination is to make money and to have associations, friendships with other people, right? So moneyed factions are latent to the human condition, I think he says. They're just natural to who we are as human beings for the most part. So as a government, as we're thinking about creating an Enlightenment era republic type of government, our job is not to control the sources of faction. That's like naturally, that's just part of being a free society. It's to control their effects on the lawmaking process. And part of the reason we're in the situation we are right now, which is a very, 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 very dire situation, is what our founders thought would protect and insulate this republic from that kind of takeover was a few things. One, a multitude of political parties, which is no longer the case. In fact, it's a duopoly where we only have two parties.
which
And
I
also,
disagree with. I basically see them as the same party, but yeah.
well, but that's what a duopoly is. It's like two parties pretending to be different, but in reality serving the
Okay,
same
sure.
interest.
Yeah, all right.
And then the other problem is the other thing they thought would protect the republic was informed citizen participation, because at their time, like the Federalist Papers were what you'd read in the newspaper. So they had this kind of fallacious and again, the country was so much smaller and the world was smaller and their worlds were smaller.
Very different world. Yep.
Right. And so they had this fundamental fallacy built into their thinking about how the republic was going to be insulated from the usurpacious influence of moneyed faction. And the result is, over the course of 250 years, every time the integrity of this republic, this country, is threatened, it comes by way of people saying, oh, we've made a lot of money. We've purchased your political system, but that's just what democracy is. Let us do it. And my answer to that is no, you cannot have this republic. And no, you cannot weaponize it on behalf of the interests of foreign governments. And if you try to do so, you should rightfully get called out by me, this community, the United States Treasury, the Department of Justice, and everyone else who's involved in this ridiculous situation.
Yeah, and it just seems wild. Like, money laundering is not easy or whatever. Getting money in here from Russia, if that's what's happening, like you got to assume, in like up in Canada, they're being traded on stock exchanges. You got to assume like people knew about that. That's just boy. I got a couple more. That was just a random interjection. I don't even have a question there, but I wanted to ask you about the M4MM here. Before we get out of here, that's my last question. Sorry to change topics. I got about 20 minutes here and I got to go, but I wanted you to hit that before we go, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh,
talk
sure.
about the
Yeah.
awards or whatever.
Yeah, sure. I don't think we need 20 minutes on this by any means, but I
Sure.
will
Okay,
just
cool.
I will quickly say, so as I mentioned earlier in the show, Curaleaf and another giant MSO called Trulieve that over the past year has been embroiled in a scandal because their employee Lorna
McMurray.
McMurray. We have two Lornas on today's show that we're talking
Yeah.
about. Lorna McMurray passed away in January of 2022
Yeah.
at Truleave's Holyoke facility. It was not really revealed until months later, at which point it then quickly came out that there was a nominal settlement between OSHA, the federal agency, and Trulieve, where they would pay a small fine and then
36,000 or something. Yeah.
maybe even less after the settlement, and then do a study into the dangers of ground cannabis dust because their
I
employee
saw
had
that.
died as a result of an asthma attack from inhaling this cannabis dust. And according to allegations from the family, was this employee was not provided PPE. She was
Right.
going around begging her family to get
Right.
PPE from their
Right. So she said she asked for it from stepdad. Trulieve said they offered it. It seemed like conflicting reports on that one.
Right. And but the point is here, and where we're going with this is so Trulieve just a few days ago. This is what sparked this segment that we were going to talk about. This is what sparked it off. They get an award from a charity called M4MM, Minorities for Medical Marijuana, a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Award. And the folks can imagine after what has happened over this past year, the reaction to that. It was not good. It was very
Right.
critical.
You got a dead woman on your floor, and you're getting like an inclusion and
Right.
Hmm.
And I think it's very important to recognize the issues with this company go very deep. That the Trulieve company and the revelations that have come out over the past year have only compounded some of those concerns. But it speaks to a larger issue as well, which is if you look back at the history of this M4MM organization, as I started to do, I saw, Trulieve had won it in 2019. Curaleaf had won it in 1 year. And so I go looking into their tax records, the Minorities for Medical Marijuana federal registration with because they're a nonprofit. And I find
Could you
that
tell people how they might go about finding those types of records?
Oh, sure. You can go. There's if you go to federal nonprofit search, you can go ahead and search for Minorities for Medical Marijuana. Now, let's see if I can pull this up for folks here so they can do the exact search. I have
Oh
to
yeah, do you
find.
want to share it on the screen? That would be super cool if you did that.
Yeah. So what I'm going to bring up here is just give me 1 second. I'm going to bring up the image of the letter and then also the way you can search for their tax filings. So you can see right here that number up at the top is their EIN 81-3720882, and you can use that to search up here on the Treasury's website. And you'll find a few things on that website. One of them is a letter when they were formed in August of 2017 telling them that you must file, it says, if we indicated at the top of this letter, as they do, that you're required to file Form 990, 990EZ, or 990N, our records show you're required to file an annual information return, Form 990 or Form 90EZ, or electronic notice, Form 990N, the e-postcard. If you don't file a required return or the e-postcard, I'm putting that in there, or notice for 3 consecutive years, your exempt status will be automatically revoked. So that's what their letter giving them permission to accept donations says on the federal level.
Automatically revoked. Automatically revoked.
Now, if you look up at the top here, and this is a search you can run on your own too, you'll see that they've only, M4MM, according to the federal government, filed 2 e-postcards over their, how many years? Since 2017. So 6-7 years now. They only filed in 2016 and 2019. So what does that mean? According to the federal government, 2020, 2021, and 2022 were not filed. that could potentially put the group at risk of losing its nonprofit status, which for a number of reasons, much like another group in Massachusetts called the Massachusetts Patients Advocacy Alliance, this happened to them a few years ago. You can find reporting about that from the incomparable Dan Adams at the Boston Globe, hands down one of the greatest cannabis reporters in the history of the United States, and I'll say it to anyone who asks me. But going forward,
didn't Trulieve kick him out of their facility at one
yes,
point?
in fact, Dan is such an intrepid reporter. He found the Trulieve CEO doing a visit at a site and got thrown out of the site trying to ask her questions about the death of Lorna McMurray. But going back to Dan's reporting on the nonprofit, if you read that reporting on MPAA from 2019, you'll get a really good glimpse into the type of reporting requirements these nonprofits have on the state and federal level when it comes to accepting donations. And just one consequence for M4MM, which is the charity we're talking about right now, could be letters from state attorney generals potentially saying, listen, you're active in Florida. They have an active registration for their nonprofit in Florida, but you don't have your federal forms filed. Are you soliciting donations in our states, etc.? That's a big deal. And this story, I think, is only just beginning to unfold. And the fact that they've worked, M4MM have worked with both Trulieve and Curaleaf over recent years and given them awards makes one wonder were these companies giving donations to get these awards.
Right, or who started the award show?
Well, I don't think it's an award show. It's just a designation, an award that they give out through a graphic or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, it begs the question, when I see, like I said, I posted this thing about IBM, like they right after it was found that they were contaminating some groundwater here in Vermont, and then the next year the governor gave them an award for some kind of like sustainable bullshit. It's just like, no, dude, you can't go like polluting. Like, hey, I've never polluted any water with my business. Like, can I get an award? Where's my award? I don't know.
They can give you the anti-polluter award, Caleb,
Yeah.
for your environmental efforts.
Yeah, it just okay. I got something here I have to ask you from Rodney Leinhart. Rodney told me that a while back, you guys spoke and you recommended a movie to him. And I think that he has forgotten the name of the movie, and he told me to ask you what it was.
Oh, goodness. Okay. It could be any number of movies. So I'm just going to give the two that I think it most likely were. It was either probably Citizen Kane from 1941, which was an Orson Welles film about William Randolph Hearst. Yep, I exactly. It's a great film. And what's awesome about it is we talked earlier about how propaganda was able to really entrench itself in the United States in the 20s and 30s by way of a combination of Edward Bernays, the mass propagandist, and like William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. If you watch Citizen Kane, it's a perfect allegory for deconstructing the way that propaganda apparatus had built itself up in the 40s. And fascinating anecdote, when the movie started to screen in places like Oklahoma and other cities, Hearst would send his hench people around to try to intimidate the theater owners to not screening it. And 1 week after Hearst's people successfully got a showing shut down in like Oklahoma, Hearst and Orson Welles ran into each other in the elevator of the Mark Hopkins Hotel in like 1942 or whatnot in San Francisco. And Orson Welles tells this story on a 1970 Dick Cavett interview that people should watch, where he basically says that, elevator ride was probably as awkward as my elevator ride would be today if I got in an elevator with Boris Jordan. But anyway, awesome. That's one movie. The other one it could have been is Citizen Kane. Not Citizen Kane. I just said that. Being There, which is from 1979. It's a film starring Peter Sellers. I love this movie so much that if Siskel and Ebert were still alive doing national television, I would make it my life's goal to send them an email in a way that would get them to cover this movie again. Because it is just, in my opinion, it's a Hal Ashbury film. It's the quintessential American piece of art. It's about a innocent gardener who is living in Washington, D.C. in the 70s, right when the moon landing and stuff is happening. His employer dies. He gets cast out into the world for the first time, and he randomly meets this very wealthy sort of DC kind of power broker, a master of the universe type. And through a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, this gardener ends up friends with the president on national TV giving financial advice, and eventually himself kind of pushed by the powers that be to become president. I think the movie's wonderful because of something that happens at the end. I'm not going to talk about it now, but if that's what I recommend,
don't spoil it. Yeah.
I will not. But if that's what I recommended to Rodney, I love his show, Deliciously Dope TV. I encourage people to check it out. I hope he'll send me a message after he watches whatever it is I told him to watch. So
I don't know if he forgot it too. He just said, if you find out what movie Grant told me to watch, I'll give you a high five. So I did my digging, and Rodney, you got your report there, sir.
I think I also betray my own idiosyncrasies yet again by revealing the fact that if someone asks me what movie I recommended to them, it can only possibly be one of two movies, but that's neither here nor there.
Word up. Well, Grant, that's all I got here, man. This has been a solid almost 2 hours. I want to ask you this, though. Well, first, I want to thank you for your time again here, man. And I want to say fucking good job. Keep at it. And, I always leave the last word for my guests. So if there's anything we missed, or any shout outs you want to do or plugs here, it's all you. Thanks again, man. Pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Caleb, and thank you for all the work you do as well. As much as I would love to say that any one of us are changing the world, the reality is it is the amalgamation of all of our work, whether it's you, me, the excellent reporters in Massachusetts like Dan Adams or Cassie McGrath or
Crawford,
any number of important reporters. I think it's crucial to understand that it's the collective of all of our work. Scott Stedman, Matt Berdarney, too. Let's not forget them. And of course, the Barron's article, Bill App.
I'll have to check them out. I've never heard of them. Yeah.
Oh, they're great. They go back to the 20s, national publication. But every single person who does this solely out of trying to hold people accountable, it's because of that collection of our work together that these companies, even in some way, shape, or form, may think about changing how they operate, and our government may change its thinking about how they oversee these companies. So you can find more from me on any number of places, patreon.com/Grant Smith-Ellis if you want to give me a small donation each month, although my work is always available for free, and on any number of social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Grant Smith-Ellis. Thank you again, Caleb. Appreciate all your work. We'll talk again soon, I hope. And it's been a fun 2 hours. I thought it was 5 minutes.
Hell yeah. Keep at it, man. Good work. Peace.